Here are three very popular video games in the United States: Grand Theft Auto, Fortnite, and Call of Duty. And there's one thing that all these games have in common, and that's that they're all violent video games. Violent video games are not the cause of violent acts in the US, and that is why violent video games should not be banned. Violent acts in society are something that affect us all, and if we could prevent them, we would, but we just can't. But the problem is that people place the blame on violent video games, and that is just not the case. Video games are the scapegoat in this situation. Today I will prove to you that video games do not result in any violent behavior by telling you about the sales of violent video games, flawed studies that connect the two, and how violent video games actually have positive effects and reduce violence. So, first, let's look at the sales of violent video games. Sales of violent video games have gone up tremendously, while the number of violence have actually decreased in young people. According to Statista Research Department, which is statistics from the government, the number of violent crimes in kids ages 12 through 17 have actually significantly decreased and is close to the lowest point it's been in 40 years. In 1993, there were 1.1 million violent crimes committed by kids, but now in 2017, the number had dropped to just 215,000. And this has all happened while video game sales have skyrocketed, with violent video games being some of the most popular played around the world. When looking at the two graphs together, they actually look inversely related. So, here's another graph showing statistics, and this one's made by Vox. It shows sales of video games next to violent gun deaths. As you can see, none of the most popular video game countries have any problem with violent deaths except for the US. This is not a video game problem. This is a problem with our country. The reason people believe it, that violent gun death is caused by violent video games, is because they look at flawed research. Studies that link violence in the real world to video games are just completely flawed. Many studies don't look into other factors that cause violence in children, such as a bad home life, and many of these studies are also way too short to find any real credible information. According to Christopher Ferguson of Time, many of the experiments testing this only allow kids to play for about 10 minutes or less, which doesn't allow for any real data to be found, especially with these games being so complex and hard to pick up. Frustrations are the most likely outcome in this situation. Even the US Supreme Court has ruled that there's no evidence that violent video games cause any sort of violence in kids. They stated, "These studies have been rejected by every court to consider them, and with good reason. None of the studies done that say there's any relation are accurate at all, and even our own court system is proving this." Now I have a video.
A lot of bad things are happening to young kids, and young minds are being formed, and we have to do something about maybe what they're seeing and how they're seeing it, and also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts. And then you go the further step, and that's the movies. You see these movies, they're so violent, and yet a kid is able to see the movie if sex isn't involved, but killing is involved, and maybe they have to put a rating system for that. And you get into a whole very complicated, very big deal. Is that you are having movies come out that are so violent with the killing and everything else that maybe that's another thing we're going to have to discuss. And a lot of people are saying it. You have these movies today where you can go and have a child see the movie, and yet it's so violent and so disgusting. So we may have to talk about that also.
President speaking moments ago over at the White House meeting with local and state officials saying these violent movie videos very, very potentially dangerous. Samuel Zeif is still with us. He survived the shooting at the Stoneman Douglas High School. You grew up with a lot of these video games. What's your reaction when you hear the president say that?
My friends and I have been playing video games our whole life, and never, ever, and seeing, of course, violent movies, being kids, but never have we ever felt driven or provoked by those actions in those games to do something as horrible as this, I don't think anyone is. It's a video game. Something happens, you restart. We know that's not how life is. And I think it's a distraction. The president's trying to distract us.
He also clarified his position on arming.
It's sad that even our own president isn't educated on the matter and is using video games as a scapegoat in this terrible situation. Video game players know the difference between what the real world is and what the video game is. So, after hearing those 2 points, I don't know how you could still believe that video games cause gun violence. And actually, video games have many helpful effects and reduce violent acts. Violent video games actually help to build skills and relieve stress, get anger out, and reduce depression. In a study done by a professor at Texas A&M International University, 103 young people were given a frustrating task, and afterwards they would either play no game, a non-violent video game, or a violent video game. And the results showed that the people that played the violent video game showed the most progress in reducing stress, anger, and depression. Violent video games are great for reducing stress, and they allow players to leave any anger they have in the game. These games are also being used as a form of therapy to actually reduce violence in kids. And with virtual reality becoming bigger, it's becoming a lot more popular. So, how could something being used in therapy to prevent violence be causing violence? It just does not relate. Violent video games also have many other helpful effects in people as well. Violent video games help build skills from a young age. Playing violent video games helps to build all kinds of useful skills. First-person shooter games are great for building reaction time, which is helpful in playing all sports, driving, just everyday tasks it's great for. Many violent video games also help build social skills and help kids work as a team. This is caused by team-based modes in many of the games. Another surprising fact, according to a study by Alberto Passo in the International Journal of Communication, students who are gamers score very well in math, while students who spend more time on social media actually have below average scores. Lastly, video games also train people to be better problem solvers and use more critical thinking in their real life. I know I've played a lot of video games growing up, and they've done nothing but benefit me in my lifetime. So, after hearing this, violent video games should no longer be seen as a problem in society, because there's proof that they don't cause violent acts. In this speech, I proved to you all that video games don't cause violence by talking about the sales, faulty reports, and also the positive effects of video games. So, after hearing this, moving forward, I strive for everyone listening today to no longer allow the slander of video games in the real world. Video games